Good afternoon. I am Jed Dobson, a professor of English and creative writing here at Dartmouth. I'm also spending this year in the Office of the Provost thinking hard about the future of AI and the college as the special advisor to the Provost for AI. Allow me to welcome you on behalf of the Montgomery Fellows Program. The Montgomery Fellows Program brings exceptional people to an exceptional place. That exceptional place, of course, is Dartmouth College, but is also the Montgomery House on Occam Pond, which was purchased in 1977 through the generosity of Kenneth Montgomery, class of 1925, and his wife, Harley. Our fellow today, the college's 272nd resident fellow, comes to share with us her life and wisdom. But first, a little about this series. In partnership with the Montgomery Fellows Program, we have developed a series of connected visits of 4 Montgomery Fellows in the winter and spring terms. We've titled this series Agency, Speech, and Ethics in the AI Era. The interest and expertise of our 4 fellows are fine-tuned in the direction of some of the most pressing problems connected with artificial intelligence. We've invited computer scientists, historians, legal scholars, and philosophers to help us think about the impacts of these new technologies on our campus, in our research, in our classrooms, and in everyday life. We have asked Dartmouth President Emeritus and Professor of Mathematics, Philip J. Hanlon, to introduce tonight's special guest. Allow me to briefly say a few things about Phil Hanlon. A member of the class of 1977, Hanlon was Dartmouth's 18th president, serving from 2013 to 2023. The recipient of numerous awards for his research, including a Guggenheim, the Sloan Fellowship, a Henry Russell Award, and the National Science Foundation's Presidential Young Investigator Award, Hanlon is also a talented administrator, serving as provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the University of Michigan before coming back home to Dartmouth. As president, his priorities and initiatives remade Dartmouth. He tackled long-standing risky issues in student life with moving Dartmouth forward and addressed crucial cultural issues affecting faculty and staff with inclusive excellence and the Campus Climate and Culture Initiative. He established new centers, among these the Irving Institute, and led the development of the west side of campus, including expansion of the Thayer School of Engineering, and established the Society of Fellows. A committed teacher, Hanlon taught a math course every year while president, and since stepping down, he has returned to the faculty, teaching this year a course in probability, calculus, and one titled sports analytics. I heard he has 60 students just this term. I could say so much more about his career and achievements, but will you please join me now in welcoming Phil Hanlon.
Thank you, Jed, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon for what's going to be a great event, I'm sure. President John Sloan Dickey famously said to every Dartmouth graduating class, "You are the stuff of this institution, and what you are, it will be." Meaning that the accomplishments of our alumni and the lives they lead are one of our best measures of success as a university. And so today we take great pride in hearing from one of the most accomplished Dartmouth graduates, Martha Pollack, member of the great class of 1979. Martha earned her PhD at the University of Pennsylvania following her BA here at Dartmouth. Then she had stints at SRI International and the University of Pittsburgh before joining the faculty at the University of Michigan in the year 2000. As a scholar, Martha is widely published and cited in the field of artificial intelligence, where she's contributed to natural language processing and tools for cognitive assistance. In recognition of her scholarly contributions and academic leadership, Martha has been elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Association for the Advancement of Science, the Computing Research Association, and the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. Martha is a natural leader, humble, passionate, and committed to the work of the Academy. At Michigan, she rose to be Dean of the School of Information, then Vice Provost, and then Provost, before moving to Cornell as their president in 2017. I had the honor of working closely with her at Michigan, and then later when we were both Ivy presidents. I can report that she is one of the deepest thinkers about higher education that I know, and I have learned so much from her in every one of our interactions. Today, you will all have the opportunity to learn from her. Please join me in welcoming Martha Pollack. So Martha, a few questions, but first a welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's really great to be back here at Dartmouth after so long.
Okay, so let's start there. Tell us a little bit about your time at Dartmouth and how it prepared you for your research in AI.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody knows that Dartmouth sort of is officially the home of AI, right? It was named here. It was here that in 1956, John McCarthy came up with that term. That, I am pleased to say, was before I was born. But even by the time I was a student here in the late 70s, there was no computer science department. There were very, very few computer science courses. I took both of them. Actually, I think there might have been 3. And I spent a lot of time in what was then the Kiewit Computation Center at the help desk answering questions and also playing endless hours of this text-based game named Adventure that some of you, I see Dave Provost-Cott's nodding, may remember. As I say, you couldn't major in computer science. But even then, even before graduate school, I was very interested in the human brain and how people think. And under the supervision of my wonderful advisor, who is here today, I have to say, he helped me design a self-design major in linguistics, where I took as much math as a math major, but I also took anthropological linguistics and philosophy of language, and I went to MIT for a semester and learned about language. And all of that really did prepare me for graduate school in computer science and in AI in particular.
Great. So what did AI look like back then?
Oh, that's a great question. AI was really very, very different when I was in graduate school. It was not terribly rigorous. We were kind of the poor stepchild of computer science. People didn't take us too seriously, and they were kind of right not to take us too seriously. In addition to not being very rigorous, what we achieved was kind of pitiful. So if we could get the computer to tell us how you take 3 blocks on a table and stack it into a tower, we considered that a win. We did a lot of work on natural language processing back then. There was a lot of attention on planning. There was a lot of focus on knowledge representation, which meant we were trying to take the knowledge we had about the world and the ways in which we at least thought we think about the world and like manually stuff that into the computer and manually give instructions to the computer about how to reason. There was very little work on machine learning, which of course is at the heart of today's AIs. But interestingly, the core, the seeds of today's AIs were already known. So if you'll bear with me for just a little bit of history, you have to go all the way back to 1943 when the first neural nets were developed. Pitts and McCulloch developed them, and they were meant to be models of the brain. They weren't meant to have anything to do with computation. And then in 1958, when I was alive, but barely, Frank Rosenblatt, who I have to say was a Cornell faculty member, developed the first machine learning algorithm. And it worked on these neural nets. They were called perceptrons. But there was a serious problem. There was a representational problem. There were all kinds of things you couldn't represent. For the, how many in this audience are computer scientists? Okay, so the 4 of you know that what you couldn't represent, you could only represent functions that are linearly separable in 2 dimensions, right? Or their generalization to higher dimensions. For everybody else, it doesn't matter. The point was that there were things in the real world that you couldn't represent. And this was a problem. I think what's not appreciated when people think about the history is that we already knew the solution to the problem. The solution was not just to have one layer of perceptrons, but to have the kind of multi-layer networks that are the core of today's LLMs. The problem was that Rosenblatt's learning algorithm didn't work on them. But as early as 1986, that was solved as well, because that was when the backpropagation algorithm, the algorithm that really drives today's AIs, was created. Okay, so that's 1986. And you don't really see the big advances in AI till the late 90s and really arguably the last 3 or 4 years. So you have to ask, what changed? And I think this is really important. Yeah, there have been algorithmic and representational advances. Certainly for those of you who follow this sort of thing, the transformer model, which came out, I think, in 2017, had a big impact. But what really changed was scale. We have so much more computational power than we did even 4 or 5 years ago. We have so much more storage. We have so much more data collected by better sensors. And I think of the internet as kind of a sensor that gathers information. That's what really changed. And I tell you all this because I think it does matter in terms of how we think about ourselves and how we think about AI. There's a wonderful paper, it's not even a paper, it was a blog post that I think anyone who's interested in AI should read. It was written by Rich Sutton. Rich Sutton and Andy Barto just won the Turing Prize last month, which is like the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. And Rich Sutton wrote this blog post in I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, called The Bitter Lesson. And Sutton's bitter lesson is that the history of AI has been one in which we take what we think we know about how we think and how we understand the world, and we plug it in manually, and then inevitably along comes a little more compute power, and suddenly just throwing simple, uninteresting algorithms at lots of data with lots of power, blows the more complicated manually built systems, if you will, out of the water. And we see this over and over and over again. And Sutton himself says, and I want to read this quote, that in addition to having a lesson from this about how AI works, we should understand that, quote, the actual contents of minds, human minds, are tremendously, irredeemably complex. We should stop trying to find simple ways to think about the contents of minds. So yeah, these things are just doing statistical pattern matching, stochastic pattern matching. They're sometimes called stochastic parrots. It's kind of amazing how well they do as stochastic parrots. Our brains are different. We have many, 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 many more connections. I used to say we have much less data, but I actually think we just have a different kind of data, less text, much more visual and tactile data. But I think we really don't understand the relationship between our brains and what the LLMs are doing. And until we do, it strikes me as facile to make pronouncements about what computers maybe can and can't ever do. We might not be wrong in saying a computer could never do X, whatever X is, but it's pretty facile and there isn't a lot of evidence to back that up yet. So that's a long story that brings us up to today.
A great story, okay. So do you think that soon we're going to see artificial general intelligence where AI surpass human intellect across virtually all cognitive tasks?
I'm going to say something that nobody sitting in these kind of chairs usually says. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. I don't know if we're going to have artificial general intelligence soon, 2 years, 5 years, if we're going to have it further out, if we're never going to have it. I don't know if we do have it, or even if we don't have it, even if AI continues on its current trajectory. I don't know what that's going to mean for the world of work and whether all of the kinds of jobs we all have are going to go away or not. If not all the jobs go away, I don't know what it means for the university, for whether we still have human faculty and human students. And I certainly don't know. AI has a lot of potential benefits and a lot of potential risks, and I don't know which of those are going to dominate. Now, I certainly have some ideas about that, or I wouldn't be here sitting in front of you. I've certainly thought a lot about it. But I really don't know. And the one thing I do know, or the one thing I at least feel comfortable saying, is that there are going to be changes. There's going to be really dramatic changes inside and outside of the academy. And now is the moment urgently, I think, that we need people in the university helping to think about those changes, develop policies about those changes, think about how we can have the kind of future we want. And honestly, that's the only real point I want to make today, so you should all feel free to get up and leave at this point, because that's what I want to say.
Well, they aren't all leaving, so, so let's proceed. So you kind of touched on this, but what should universities be doing right now with regards to using AI?
Leaning in. I think universities have got to be leaning in. I think opting out is simply not an option. It's not an option in teaching, because our students are coming to us using AI and our students are going to be using AI throughout their personal and professional lives, and I think it's our responsibility to teach them how to do that well. I think it's not an option in our research, because we're not going to be as good at our research if we opt out. I think opting out of using AI is a little bit like an astronomer opting out of using a high-powered telescope, or even an historian opting out of using search. And I think it's not an option to opt out within our disciplinary areas of expertise for the reasons I've already said. I think we've got to grasp the bull by the horn and try to figure out what AI means for us and how we build a better future with it.
Okay, so can you say more about the use of AI in teaching? And aren't you worried, or are you worried that we're leading students to taking shortcuts that will diminish their education?
Yeah, it's funny. That's the main question that people have been asking me over the week that I've been here. Am I worried about cheating? Am I worried about offloading the main cognitive tasks, and that's going to lead to a decay in learning? Am I worried about lack of academic integrity? Yes, of course I am. I mean, we need to set clear expectations for our students about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. We need to think hard about what are the things that they need to learn and will only learn without the use of AI, and what are the things where really they should be using AI. We need to uphold standards of academic integrity. But I think it's a mistake to focus only on that. And I don't think people here are. I mean, I've actually been quite impressed with what's going on, thanks to Jed and others here at Dartmouth. Everything from the decal grants, right, where you're providing small grants to faculty to try and explore and experiment with the technology, to series like this. I mean, you're obviously taking it very, very seriously. But it's certainly not ubiquitous. It's certainly not every faculty member who's doing it. And certainly other universities don't necessarily have this level of urgency. Urgency, as I say, in research, in teaching, and sort of in everything we do, but specifically with respect to teaching, urgency to make pedagogical change. And changing pedagogy is really, really hard. So I'm going to read you another quote, and I want all of you to guess. Okay, I'm going to read you a quote, and I want you to guess who said this and when. Okay, here's the quote. Lecturing as a method of instruction dates from classical and medieval times, before the invention of printing. When books were worth their weight in gold, professors had to lecture. Cheap printing has radically changed the situation which produced the lecturer of antiquity. What decade? Guess a decade. Come on, take a guess. 50s. Good guess. No, it was actually Aldous Huxley in 1927 in an essay called Proper Studies. And because it's kind of amusing, I want to read you the rest of the quote. So remember, cheap printing has radically changed the situation which produced the lecturer of antiquity. And yet, preposterous anomaly, the lecturer survives and even flourishes. In all the universities of Europe, his voice still drones and brays, just as it droned and brayed in the days of Duns Scotus and Thomas Aquinas. Lecturers are as much of an anachronism as bad drains or tallow candles. It is high time they were got rid of. So changing the way we teach has never been easy.
Okay, besides getting rid of lecturers, what does this pedagogical transformation look like?
I think it has three components. Okay, so first, we have to teach AI literacy to our students, right? They have to know how to use the tools effectively. They have to know what the shortcomings are. I think everybody, goes right to hallucinations. Sure, they should know about hallucinations. But do they know about sycophantry? Do they know that, AI is always, I don't know about you guys, but I use AI sometimes. I'm trying to learn Spanish, and I use AI to help me learn Spanish. And it's always telling me what a wonderful job I'm doing, even when I know I'm not doing a very good job at all. Do they know about that? Do they know about issues of privacy and bias? I think we really, that's the first thing. And it has to be done not just in freshman orientation, but across the curriculum. Second, I think we have to restructure the coursework to actively promote the use of AI, to model how it's used, and to make us more effective as teachers. And, people are already doing this. I'm sure that the computer science faculty here is already teaching students how to use the LLMs to do the first drafts to help build their code, because if you're not, then it's pretty much professional malpractice, given the way that these tools are being used out there in the real world. I know that there are writing teachers who are helping students learn how to use AI to generate ideas and to give edits on their papers and so on. I have a colleague, I know you don't have a law school here, but I have a colleague in the law school at Michigan who tells me that what they're doing is teaching their students to take, when they're learning to be litigators, to take their arguments, give it to the LLMs and say, what questions is this going to raise in the minds of the jury, and getting very helpful feedback from that. So there's lots of work being done, but for it to become really ubiquitous, I think we're going to have to provide a lot of support to the faculty. We're going to have to make, faculty are busy, right? I mean, I was an administrator for a long time, but I was a faculty for a long time before that, and I know how busy faculty members are. So we're going to need tools, like ready to use, easy to use tools. I'll give you a couple of examples. These are both from eCornell, which is the e-learning component of Cornell, but you could imagine them on campus, certainly in a residential experience, particularly with a flipped classroom. One of them is simply an engagement tool. So when the student reads a paper or watches a video or what have you, it then says to them, okay, tell me 3 things you learned in this paper, or tell me about whatever the concept in the paper is. And it then engages the student in a discussion, but it's not just a random chat box who, you don't know what it's been trained on. It's been trained on the faculty member's material. Make it easy for the faculty to do that. Another tool they use is a simulated conversational agent. eCornell happens to use it in the business school for learning to negotiate, but you could imagine it in a history course, like have a debate with a character from history. Again, trained on and within the material that the instructor uses. So, okay, so learn AI literacy, make learning more effective by adapting AI tools. Okay, now the third, which is the one which is going to make me very unpopular, except perhaps with the provost, because provosts have to manage budgets. And that is, we've got to use these tools to become more efficient. So let me tell you about a third tool that eCornell is using. It is a tool that when a student submits their work, it does a first draft of the assessment, and it gives talking points to the faculty member. It says, start from here in what you feed back to the student. Now, I got to tell you, Phil, the first time I saw this, I had this completely dystopian image of the student is like not doing the work, they're just using ChatGPT, and the faculty is not grading it, it's using ChatGPT, and we just take the humans out of the loop entirely. That was my initial reaction to it.
So do you think this will really all happen?
That would take the student and the faculty out of the loop? No,
Yeah.
no. I mean, not at scale, not at scale. Okay, we're getting to the interesting questions and the sort of more speculative answers. Yeah, we're always going to have some students who cheat and use these tools in inappropriate ways. And one of the things, I forget who it was, I was talking to a faculty member here, and he said to me, look, what we have to do is we have to say to the students, we have to treat them like adults. Why are you here? Why are you at Dartmouth? Somehow we've got to move away from this incentive of I want to get an A to I want to learn, and if I want to learn, there will be times at which it's appropriate to use AI and times at which it's not. But here's why I think, at least, let's start with faculty. Why do I think we're still going to have human faculty? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, the idea that you could get a good education without going to a university, that's nothing new, right? Abraham Lincoln was self-educated. Will from Good Will Hunting, he learned math from reading the whiteboard on Harvard. I mean, it's much harder to become self-educated, right? You don't have someone who's sort of guiding you and telling you what it is you should learn and what order it's effective to learn it in. You don't have someone to answer your questions when you're confused. You don't have someone to assess your work and say, you understand this, but you need more work here. But it's certainly possible, and it became easier with the internet. Still harder, still I think less fun than in a university environment, but possible. And it's become easier still with AI. But I think there are a few reasons that we still want to and will want to have human experts. The first is that I think we still want human beings curating the curriculum. So with all due respect, I think you could hand over the order in which you learn things and the exercises for freshman calculus to an AI, and it really wouldn't make a difference. You want humans in there to help, but in terms of the order in which you learn things and what material you learn, I don't think it would matter if everyone in the country had the same curriculum. I don't think that's true for something like, oh, I don't know, economic history or medical ethics or a host of other things where what you want are different faculty with different perspectives, teaching different courses, and where there's then a clash, those faculty will be working with each other, with students, and making differences. When I was a kid, I still remember this, I was a little kid, and I asked my dad, why are there all these newspapers? Like, I grew up in New York, I grew outside of New York, why do we need the New York Times and the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal all to report about that fire on 57th Street? And of course, when I got older, I learned the danger of having one source of news. And I think there's a parallel here. So the first reason I think we're going to still have human faculty is so that we can have different and changing curricula over time.
And you mentioned other reasons for why we have
Yeah,
human faculty?
yeah. And now I am really getting into this sort of speculative, I don't have good scientific evidence for this, but let me say a couple. First goes to how we motivate students. So when I used to teach, for many, many years, I taught the discrete math course. I taught the math computer scientists needed to do computer science. Years after everyone went to PowerPoint slides, I was still using a whiteboard. And in part I did that. You might have noticed I can talk very fast. It slowed me down if I had to write on the board. But in part I also did it because I would make mistakes. And I always thought that the most important learning experiences for my students in that classroom was when one of them noticed that I had made a mistake in a proof or a problem, and I had to erase it, and I had to, on the fly, figure out what I had done wrong. I thought it both sort of showed them how to think mathematically, but it also showed them that, even your professor makes a mistake and she has to correct it. Could you program an AI to make mistakes and then correct it on the fly? Maybe, but I don't think it would be authentic, and I don't think it would be compelling. And that leads to the second reason, which is that we're social animals. So you may remember this when you and I were both at Michigan and the MOOCs were coming out. And everybody, remember the MOOCs, the massively open online courses? Everybody was terrified that the MOOCs were going to do away with higher education. And you and I used to talk about the fact that there's a street adjacent to the University of Michigan. And on that street, there's a 7-Eleven, and you could go into that 7-Eleven and you could buy a 6-pack of beer for, I don't know, $8, $10. Right next door to the 7-Eleven is the Red Hawk Bar, which is closing, by the way. I don't know if you saw that news. The Red Hawk Bar is closing. The Red Hawk had been there forever, and you could go into Red Hawk, and you could buy a single beer on tap for $8. And yet people still went to Red Hawk. Like, why was that? Because people want to be together. They want to be with other people. And what's true in the bar is true on campus, and I'm sure there's a Dartmouth joke there that I will avoid making. There is actually evidence. There is actually psychological evidence, mostly done at the K-12 level, that the quality of learning depends on the student-faculty relationship. I'm sure there needs to be more research, but it's got to be true at the college level as well. And we saw this during the pandemic, right? Students wanted to come back. But all that said, let's go back to the Red Hawk example for a minute. So suppose the price of the beer on tap in Red Hawk goes up to $50. And suppose the price of the 6-pack goes down to 50 cents. I bet you're going to see different behavior.
So tell us more. What does this have to do with higher education?
Yeah, what does this have to do with higher education? I think you can think of the cost of the beer on tap going way up as the trajectory we're on right now for the cost of higher education. And you can think of the cost of the 6-pack going down as being a rough analog for what's happening with AI. Now, there are issues of energy use, but let's put those aside for a second. The cost of higher education is a huge concern, and it's been a huge concern for decades. And as we've also seen this continued increase in the cost of higher education, what we've seen is a dramatic, terrifying to my mind, drop in public confidence in higher education. So Gallup interviews people, does surveys every year, and between 2015 and 2024, the number of people who had either a great deal or a lot of confidence in higher education dropped from 57% to 36%. Biggest drop was amongst people who identify as Republican, but you also see it amongst Democrats and independents. And to me, even more terrifying, the number of people who say they have no or little confidence in higher education went from 10% to 32%. Think about that for a minute. A third of people in this country have little or no confidence in what we do. And if you ask them why, you get a trio of answers. They think we're indoctrinating students, they think we're not teaching relevant skills, and they think we're too expensive. And that too expensive is no less important to them than the other two. Further, the trajectory is not good. Now, you know, it is true that at a place like Dartmouth or a place like Cornell, we invest a lot in financial aid. Still, our middle-income students tell us that they're feeling squeezed, and I think we have to take them seriously. And still, we know, I mean, you and I were both vice provosts for budget. We know what the trajectory looks like, and we know the reasons, right? They're very good reasons for it. Regulatory costs are out of control. States, this doesn't apply to Dartmouth, well, it applies a little bit to Cornell. States have disinvested in higher education. Today we have federal concerns. Let's set that aside for a moment. Universities, we invest in things that no company would ever invest in. Museums, libraries, expensive scientific equipment. That's all really important. We should do it, but it's expensive. We invest incredibly heavy in financial aid, which we should. I mean, one of the things I'm proudest about of my time at Cornell is that I increased the number of students on aid by 1,000. But that's expensive. And you know, companies, for-profit companies, they don't give away their product and also give you money so that you can live while you're using it. And then there's Belmaw's cost disease, which is an economic force, which says when you're in a sector that hasn't been able to use technology to drive down your costs, so sectors like education to the same degree as sectors like agricultural and manufacturing, you're going to have superinflationary costs. So you put this all together, and we're not in, we don't have a sustainable budget model in the long term. We've known this for a long time, and we haven't had good solutions. And I think that AI may offer us a solution, but we have to be open to it. We have to try. And you know, the lion's share of university budgets is labor, and the biggest bang for the buck is figuring out ways even to slightly increase the student-faculty ratio by offloading some of the work. We have to do it in a way that protects that student-faculty relationship. It's incredibly important. But I don't think we can afford to just ignore this problem, because otherwise the AI is going to cost 50 cents, the AI education, and the Dartmouth education is going to cost $50, and we're just going to be too damn expensive and price ourselves out of the market.
So let's shift
Let's
to
talk
a
about something
happier
happier.
topic. And you're sort of onto this, talking about AI's impact on the future of work and how higher education should prepare our students for that future. So we don't do vocational training at research universities, but we do want our graduates to be prepared for careers. So
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important question, but it's one that even the experts don't agree on. You know, I'm not a labor economist, but I read what the labor economists say, and you get these wildly diverging views, right? So there's people who say AI is going to take care, there aren't going to be any more jobs that involve cognitive work. And maybe not even manual work, because once we have smart enough AI agents, they're going to help us design robots that can do the manual work. And even then you see a split, even among the people who think that, you know, work is done, you see a split between the people who think it's going to generate so much wealth that we'll all sort of live happy lives of leisure, and the people who say, no, there's going to be like a handful of AI lords, and the rest of us will live in poverty on some kind of universal basic income. So that's one extreme. And then on the other extreme, you have people who say status quo, no change, right? So there was a column in the Times just a few weeks ago by Tessie McMillan Cotton, who is a professor at UNC, and she said, you know, this is just more AI hype. She acknowledges that AI might make workers' lives more difficult in certain ways, having to do, you know, demoralize them in certain ways. But she said that the use cases she sees involve just mildly reshaping the way white-collar workers work. And then you have economists, this is interesting, although I think interesting by a half head too clever, like the blogger Noah Smith, who's a well-regarded economist, who says, look, if you think about the way comparative advantage works, not competitive advantage, but comparative advantage, what we're going to have is we're going to have a whole bunch of AIs, but they're not going to do the kind of work we do. They're going to do the work we can't do because they're not free, they're expensive, they use a lot of energy, and it would be wasteful for them to do the kind of work we can do more cheaply. And if that sounds counterintuitive, the example he gives is, think about a manager and she hires an assistant, and she can maybe do the work better than her assistant can, but she hires her to offload time so that she can do other things herself. When I talk to labor economists about these things, what they say to me is, look, this is nothing new. Every time there's new technology, we get these debates about whether it means the end of work and what's going to happen. They often point to the work of Leontiev, who was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, who back in the 80s talked about the impact of automobiles and tractors on horses. So once we got tractors, horses in this country became irrelevant. And in fact, I didn't know this, I learned this recently. In the first half of the 20th century, the number of horses alive in this country decreased by half. Now, I think it's important to note that in a later paper, Leontiev pointed out that people aren't horses, and in particular, quote, horses don't vote. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, if I had to put my chips down, I would put them more. I don't think either total extreme is going to happen, but I'd lean more towards the side of we're going to see pretty significant changes in the labor market than not. That said, I think what that means for universities is less than you might think. I think we still need to be teaching the liberal arts and law and medicine. We need to change the way we teach them, and we probably need to change some of what we teach within them. There are things that we used to think you need to know that you don't need to know anymore, but we still need people with solid college educations.
So why do you say that?
Well, look, as I said, I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I do know that we want to shape it. And I think most people would agree that the best outcome is one where we're still in charge and the AIs are our partners. They supplement us, they don't replace it. If you want that, you better have people who are well educated. You better have people who understand how the world works and can think deeply. If we don't have well educated people, it seems to me, we might as well just hand all of society off to the AIs. You need knowledge to figure out what the goals are and to assess solutions and to determine where you should push and you shouldn't push. And also, and I'm going to be a little Pollyanna-ish here, but universities like Dartmouth or Cornell, or most good universities, aren't just teaching disciplinary knowledge, right? We're developing habits of mind. And there are some students here. Okay, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to go through this example for the faculty, but for the students to make this sort of real, I want to really tell you what I mean by this. So it was a long time ago that I studied computer science. I haven't written a serious line of code in 15 years easily. But the whole time that I was a dean and a provost and a president, the habits of mind that I developed in computer science are incredibly important to me. So what do I mean by that? So one of the things I learned as a computer scientist is when you get faced with a really big, complex problem, don't freak out. Break it into smaller pieces, build, we call them procedures, solutions to those smaller pieces, and make them reusable. Parameterize them so you can use them again. Another thing I learned as a computer science, I don't know if they still teach this, but we would call it iterative refinement. So don't try to build the perfect program up front. You're not going to be able to do it. The world's too complicated. Build a good enough program, throw it out there in the world. You've all heard of beta testing. Figure out what works, what doesn't work. Fix it, repeat. Fix it, repeat. This is something I did all the time as a leader. And a third thing I learned was computational complexity. And I'm not making this up. You might say, what the hell does computational complexity have to do with leadership? What computational complexity teaches you is that there are some problems that are so hard that in the lifetime of the universe, you may not be able to solve them for particular instances of them. And to me, that translated to I think this is actually due to Voltaire, the phrase that I used to use with my leadership team all the time. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, we don't know how hard this problem is. Let's do as much as we can. So Okay, that was a long-winded way of saying that what I think all the faculty in the room will agree with, the superpower of schools like Cornell, like Dartmouth or Cornell, is developing habits of mind. And I don't think you can develop habits of mind on their own. That is, I think you develop them from doing the deep disciplinary learning. I think of it a little bit like football. So I never played football, and I've had people explain to me ad nauseum the rules of football, like this is how you should think about football, Martha. And honest to God, I watch a football game, and other than this is good and this is bad, I can't figure out the strategies.
Okay, so what worries you the most about AI?
There's the question. Okay, I will answer this question. But I want to start with the benefits because it's really easy to quickly sink into all the fears. And let's not forget that AI already has and can do a lot of great things for the world, right? So I think it's easiest to see this in the medical domain. Think about AlphaFold, right? AlphaFold is an AI system that helps biochemists figure out how proteins fold. Its creators, its computer science creators, won the Nobel Prize in, help me out here, guys, biochemistry, chemistry, right? They won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. It's remarkable, and we are seeing AI impacts in drug discovery. We will see them in clinical decision making. We will see them. I mean, I really do think we're going to get personalized medicine that just is a game changer. We get personalized agriculture. There's a wonderful program at Cornell called Digital Agriculture, which is developing techniques that let farmers grow more crops, more protein, particularly in parts of the world that need protein, with less water, less fertilizers, less pesticide. Once we finally have truly automated cars, we're going to have less traffic, and that means less pollution, and it means fewer accidents. There are people working on earthquake prediction. I mean, on and on and on. There are real benefits to AI. And then there are the threats. So we've talked about job loss. I think that's real. We need to think about that. We haven't talked about, but I think everybody knows about bias and the challenges of bias. The tech folks talk all the time about misalignment, right? And misalignment, the classic example of misalignment. Okay, another raise your hand. Who here has seen the movie Fantasia, the old Disney movie Fantasia? Okay, so if you've seen the old Disney movie Fantasia, you know The Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? The modern version of The Sorcerer's Apprentice is a story that was developed by the Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2014 about the paperclip maker. And Nick says, look, imagine this. You're going to build a robot, a smart robot, and you're going to give it a pretty innocuous goal, make paperclips, because you own a paperclip factory. But this AI, this paperclip AI, doesn't have the context to situate that with respect to all the other things that we understand as people. And so it makes paperclips, and it makes paperclips, and it makes paperclips. And pretty soon it uses all the resources in the world. And maybe it even kills all the people because we're all competing for those resources. That sort of disconnect between the completely innocent, apparently innocent goal that you've given the AI and what it does is called misalignment. Now, that sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but there are already real examples of this, and I think the one that most people know about is the Facebook Myanmar fiasco in 2017-ish, right? Where the Facebook algorithm, it wasn't even an AI algorithm, it's a Facebook algorithm, and it was told to promote those stories that generated the most clicks. And what it ended up doing, this says something really terrible about human psychology, but the stories that promoted the most clicks were false, hateful stories about the Rohingya minority, and it led to real violence. In fact, it led to a genocide, and tens of thousands of people were killed. Now, there are issues about when Facebook knew this and did it pull it quickly enough and so on. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm simply noting this as a real example of misalignment between a goal which was grounded in good business practice, maximize clicks, and an outcome that was really horrible. Okay. There are another concern, I think, is misinformation, right? AIs can create much more plausible misinformation, think deep fakes, and can target people better. I'm not going to say much about that. You have one of the world's experts on your faculty here, and you should talk to him about that. But the single thing that keeps me up at night, the thing I am most frightened of by AI, is its ability to promote and enhance authoritarianism and totalitarianism through its ability to monitor all of us. So, you know, we all read 1984 way back when, but until recently, even if you had cameras and microphones everywhere, no one could really analyze all that data. No one could really track what you were doing, even if you were collecting it all. There's an old Chinese proverb about living in villages, which says, you know, you could do some things that might not be strictly kosher because heaven is high and the emperor is far away. But AI brings the emperor much closer to us. This is something that that Amitai, what's his name? His name's going to be Dario Amitai, the head of Anthropic, talks about this. This is what keeps me up at night. And I think we're only going to fight that if we start right now thinking about it. And I think that brings us back to the critical role of the university in all this.
Okay, so my last question, why? Why do you think universities are well positioned for that role?
Because I love universities. No, because I think there's a few reasons. I mean, first of all, we're not revenue maximizers. We have to balance our budget, but our incentives are not to maximize revenue. And however much you might or might not trust the tech CEOs who are closest to this and who are thinking about these issues, they do have other incentives, right? They have incentives to maximize revenue for their company. So that's number one. Number two, we are not, or we at least should not be, subject to political whims. Sometimes we are, but I really think that it is our responsibility in the university to try to be as open-minded as possible and to really try to, with intellectual humility, look at, you know, all aspects of a problem, and that's going to be needed here. I also firmly believe, and I know I've said this several times, that the solutions, I say this as a computer scientist, they're not going to be just technical solutions. They're going to have political dimensions, they're going to have policy dimensions, they're going to have cultural dimensions, they're going to have legal dimensions, and universities are the place, the best place in the world to bring together all these perspectives. Further, we have a perspective in the university that we really have almost nowhere else. Now, who in here is a humanist? Raise your hand if you're a humanist. Great, great. Because I think this is the moment for the humanities to shine, right? Let's face it. It's been a tough couple of decades for the humanities, right? You haven't had the students, you haven't had the funds, and to a large extent, you haven't had the glory. Kind of that's all gone to the STEM fields. But I think that the rise of AI, the sort of prominence of AI, brings to the forefront questions about what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to be humane? And I think we ought to be turning to the people who have spent their lives thinking about this to help us answer that. But, and here's my caveat, although I know a lot of humanists who agree with me on this, for this to work, when humanists do what they're best at, which is critical reasoning, it has to be critical reasoning in the sense in which that was always intended, to wit, deep, analytical, rigorous thought, not I'm just going to criticize. Because what we need now are people pulling together to come up with solutions, not just to criticize problems. Okay, the last thing I want to say is this. There is one potential counter-argument to the idea that universities ought to be at the heart of this, and that is that this is a moment of change and we're not really always seen as very accepting of change. You probably all know the old joke. How many faculty members does it take to change a light bulb? Change? Sorry, I was a faculty member once. But, you know, the technology is changing. It's changing around us like at lightning speed. I don't know, as I've said, exactly how the change is going to happen or what it's going to look like, but we know there's going to be change both inside and outside of the university. I think it may even change the very nature of human agency. That sounds dramatic. I mean it to be dramatic because I think this is a moment of urgency. I think the universities really can be part of who makes sure that AI benefits humanity, not the other way around, and I would hate to see that moment wasted. So that's my clarion call to all of you. Thank you.
So I think now you can all see why I learned so much from every interaction with Martha. We do have time for a few questions, so who would like to ask Martha some questions.
And as I always say, I taught for many years, so I'm really good at just sitting here and waiting until someone asks a question.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned AI literacy being an important component for the next step.
Mhm.
What exactly would you include in a curriculum on AI literacy?
So I think that's a really good question. First of all, I think it's important for students simply to know what the range of tools are, right? And they're going to be different in different disciplines. That's why I say you have to learn it throughout the curriculum. So it's not just the chatbots. It's whatever is relevant to your discipline. Okay, that's number one. I think it's important to know a little bit about how they work. I mean, you don't have to learn how deep learning works, just like you can drive a car without really knowing how a carburetor works. But because people tend to ascribe to these AIs all kinds of things that don't make sense, I think you should know a little bit about how they're working. I think you should know the kinds of things that they're useful for. So the first time people use LLMs, they typically use them as search engines, right? And I think it's important to sort of learn that you can engage in a conversation with them, and you can, when you think about pretty much whatever discipline you're in, one thing they're really good for is idea generation. Now, some of their ideas are going to be terrible, but that's okay, because the best way to get a good idea is to have lots of ideas. So you need to learn how they can be effective, and then you need to learn about their limitations. So you need to learn about hallucinations. You need to learn about sycophancy. You need to learn, I don't know how many people have used deep research. Deep research is great, but it doesn't go behind the paywall. And some people don't know that, right? And so they use deep research and they think they're actually getting a sort of relatively complete assessment of what's going on in the field, and they don't. So I think you also need to learn about those limitations. And then very, very important, of course, in the college setting is you need to learn about AI ethics, and you need to learn about when you cite things and what plagiarism looks like, and what the expectations are for you as a student.
Other questions?
I have a question from a humanist perspective.
Wait, use the mic so people, yeah, because the people in the back.
Humanists can project the voice. You really have mentioned good pedagogy, good pedagogical practices, and I wonder if what you were envisioning shouldn't really be something more radical. So as we think about AI, shouldn't we change much more than approaching AI? Because we are so focused on output. If we were more focused on input, if we were more focused on questions instead of answers, if we were considering different perspectives, but those are broader questions that are not necessarily related to AI. So should we think in a more radical way
Yes.
to what we do?
Yes, and I'm not prepared, and it would not be appropriate for me to say to a humanist, this is how you should teach in a humanist class, in a humanistic classroom, or classroom which you're teaching humanities. But I do think that that these new AI tools actually open up opportunities for us to think about whether some of these broader approaches that we didn't do for whatever reasons we didn't do them, to think about whether there are ways to use the tools to make that possible. So as a very small example, I think I mentioned, because I've just been mentioning constantly, one of the things I'm trying to do right now is learn Spanish, and I have a human tutor, I'm using a human as well, but I'm also using an AI, and the AI is really good at correcting my grammar. Now, if you sort of offloaded your work of correcting Spanish grammar, does that make room for you? Maybe not even using AI, maybe using AI in other ways, but maybe simply it leaves more space for you to do other things that you want. I think everybody should be thinking hard about this. I will tell you one thing I find, I can't get my head around this, and it's kind of freaking me out. So I use ChatGPT, right, and I'll go back and forth with it, and I get done with a session, and it will say, would you like me to generate more examples? Because it always does that. I'm a computer scientist. I know how it works. I know what it is, and I still feel compelled to say, no, thank you, I'll be back later, instead of walking away.
All right, one more question. We got time for one more.
In the back?
So I'm sitting with my colleague here. We're both learning Italian together with a human person, but we're also using our AI and falling in love with it at the same time, I will also say, which is interesting. So a question about how to get faculty who might be resistant, and it's not just people in the humanities at all. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
across the institution, especially when it comes to what Tanya was talking about, changing your pedagogical sort of method. What do you suggest is the best kind of, well, I mean, this is actually a question about what kind of ambassadors you need on campus to make that case, because I have to say, putting, some computer science professors forward and saying this is the greatest thing in the world is not necessarily going to work. So
No,
how-
no, 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 absolutely not, absolutely not. You never want computer scientists to try and convince people of anything. No, no. I think it's, okay, so there's a few things here. That's a great question. It actually has nothing to do with AI, right? I mean, that's something I thought about for years as a provost and as a dean, as a president. And I think, when I think about that, I'll tell you, I go way back to when I was first at the University of Michigan, and I was a full professor, but I was a very young, brand new full professor. And they had an NSF advanced grant. I don't know if you guys had an advanced grant here, which was meant to increase the diversity of women in the STEM fields. And the woman who ran it was a psychologist by training, and she was an expert in all of the literature on implicit bias. But as with not putting a computer scientist in front of people to get them to adopt LLMs, you don't want a psychologist standing up there and lecturing on implicit bias to a group of faculty. They're not going to buy it. So what she did was she got a group of us. We were all STEM faculty. I was on it. And she taught us about this. And then we went out. We were ambassadors, and we would go. And initially, we would just go by invitation. Right? If you were invited into a department, you would go, and it wasn't mandatory. And then some of the schools and colleges said, you know what, we're going to make this mandatory if you're on a search committee. If you're on a search committee, you have to go hear about this. And then, and it just sort of grew. And I saw something similar when I was at Cornell, and we were doing a lot of work with active learning and flipped classroom. I don't think you ever force faculty to do anything. And I don't think you ever do it from the top down. I used to say as president, like, if I say this, then no faculty will ever do it. Like, that's just sort of the dynamic. But what you have to do is you have to get the faculty who are excited about this and who have seen the enthusiasm in their own students and who have dealt with the issue of, my students are using this anyway, and I have a way to sort of harness that energy productively, and you get them to talk to other people. So it's a very much, I think, a bottom-up kind of thing.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming. Let's
Thank
thank
you.
Martha one more time.